My parents told my 10-year-old daughter there was no room for her at the Christmas table. She stood on their porch holding a bag of gifts she'd wrapped herself, and they closed the door. She walked almost 2 miles home in 28-degree darkness to an empty house. When I found out, I didn't scream. I made one phone call. 5 hours later, my parents received a certified letter, and the color left their faces. My name is Audrey Ashford. I'm 34, and my daughter Nora is 10. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the week before Christmas, the week everything in my family quietly, permanently cracked open. That December, Nora and I were living in a one-bedroom apartment off Broad Street in Richmond. She got the bedroom, I got the couch. The radiator made a ticking sound every 40 minutes like a metronome nobody asked for, and the kitchen faucet had a drip I'd learned to sleep through. It wasn't much, but it was ours, temporarily at least. I was mid-divorce. My ex, Ryan, had filed for primary custody 3 months earlier, and my attorney had made one thing very clear. The judge would be looking at stability. Stable housing, stable income, stable environment. Any disruption, any hint that Nora's home life was chaotic, and Ryan's lawyer would use it. So I kept my head down. I worked night shifts in the ER at St. Mary's, picked up extra rotations when they came, and made sure every bill was paid on the first of the month. I didn't have room for mistakes. My parents knew all of this. They knew about the custody hearing scheduled for January 3rd, and they used it the way you'd use a leash on a dog that's trying to leave. But I'll get to that. That week before Christmas, Nora was at the kitchen table every night after homework, cutting colored paper, folding cards, writing names in her round, careful handwriting. She made one for my mother, one for my father, one for my brother Kyle, one for his wife Tiffany, and 2 for their kids. She wrapped small gifts in newspaper because wrapping paper was $4 a roll, and I'd said maybe next time. She didn't complain. She just found the comics section and used that instead. On one of the cards, the one for my mother, she'd written, "Dear Grandma, I can't wait to see everyone. Love, Nora." And beside her name, a little hand-drawn sun. She always drew that. She said it was so people would feel warm when they read it. There was a framed photograph in my parents' living room, had been there as long as I could remember. My great-grandmother Ruth, standing in front of that house the day she bought it in 1987. On the back, in her handwriting, "For my family. All of them." I remember being maybe 12, visiting Grandma Ruth at the house, and her putting her hand on my shoulder and saying, "This house is mine, Audrey, remember that." I didn't understand why she said it that way, like she was planting a flag. I would understand later. My mother, Janet Ashford, was 60 years old and had never met a room she couldn't control. At church, she was the woman who organized the potluck, remembered everyone's birthday, brought casserole to every funeral. Neighbors called her a saint. She liked that. She collected the word the way some people collect porcelain, carefully, and where everyone could see it. At home, Janet decided who was invited to dinner and who wasn't, who sat where, who spoke, and when. My father, Gerald, 62, retired early from warehouse management, sat in his recliner and agreed with whatever she said. His silence wasn't neutral. It was a vote. My brother Kyle was 29 and had never paid rent in his life. He sold cars at a dealership in Short Pump, made average money, and spent like he made twice that, because our parents covered the difference. He and his wife Tiffany lived upstairs in the house. Grandma Ruth's house. Free. Kyle drove a truck our mother had bought him with money she called savings. Nobody asked where the savings came from. Me? I paid for nursing school with loans and night shifts at a diner. When I got married, my mother said, "Keep it simple, Audrey. An outdoor ceremony is fine." When Kyle got married, she booked a $15,000 venue. When I filed for divorce, she said, "A woman should know how to keep her husband." When Kyle and Tiffany nearly split 2 years ago, she said, "Tiffany needs to be more patient with him." Every week she'd call me, not to ask how I was, but to remind me not to do anything stupid before the custody hearing. The implication wasn't subtle. If you make waves, you won't have a place to land. And the judge will hear about it. I once saw her close her laptop fast when I walked into the kitchen. The screen had an Airbnb logo on it. I didn't think much of it then. That was a mistake. The plan for Christmas was simple. I was scheduled for a double shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., because holiday pay was time and a half, and I needed every cent for the attorney retainer. My parents would pick up Nora at 4, bring her to the house for Christmas dinner, and I'd get her the next morning. Of course, my mother said on the phone when I confirmed. Bring her over. We'll have a wonderful time. My father's voice from the background. Yup, just bring her. Nora spent Christmas Eve laying out her outfit, a green sweater she'd picked at Goodwill, the one she said made her look Christmassy. She arranged the gifts in a canvas tote bag, each one tagged, each tag with a sun. I packed her things that afternoon like I was packing a deployment bag. Heavy coat, wool hat, gloves, scarf. I slipped a granola bar into her pocket in case dinner ran late, and I put something else in there, an old phone of mine. No data plan, no apps, just the ability to make calls. I'd programmed 2 numbers into it, mine and Maggie's. Maggie Cole was my best friend, a nurse on the same floor at St. Mary's. She'd known Nora since birth. If anything happened and I was elbow deep in a trauma case with no signal, Nora could reach Maggie. Just in case, I told Nora. If you can't get me, call Maggie. Nora tucked the phone into her coat pocket and smiled. Mom, relax. It's just Grandma and Grandpa's house. At 3:45 p.m. on Christmas Day, I kissed her forehead in the hospital parking lot, watched her climb into my mother's car with her bag of gifts and her green sweater and her little sons. And I walked into the ER. That was the last time I saw my daughter smile for days. Everything I'm about to tell you comes from 3 sources. What Nora told me afterward, the voicemail she left on my phone, and the call log on the old phone I'd given her. I wasn't there. I was starting an IV on a 60-year-old man having chest pains when it happened. But I've heard the story enough times now that I can see it, every detail, like I was standing on that porch myself. 5:15 p.m. My mother's car pulled up to the house. The windows were glowing, garland on the railing, the front door wreath my mother bought new every year. Inside, laughter, the Nat King Cole Christmas album she always played, and the smell of roast turkey and rosemary stuffing drifting out through the weather stripping. Nora walked up the steps with her tote bag. My mother let her in. Nora stood in the hallway, hearing voices from the dining room. Kyle, Tiffany, the kids, Gerald. She started to take off her coat. Then my mother went into the kitchen. Nora heard low voices. Her name, Kyle's voice, then my mother's. Then nothing for a minute, 5:30 p.m. My mother came back out. Her face had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced with that polite, practical expression she wore when she was about to say something cruel and call it reasonable. Nora, sweetie, we've got a little problem. The table is full. Kyle's in-laws came last minute. There's just no room. You should probably head home. Your mom will be back in the morning. Nora looked at the bag in her hands. But I brought presents for everyone. My mother glanced at the tote bag the way you'd glance at a flyer someone hands you on the street. That's sweet. Just leave them on the porch. We'll open them later. Behind my mother, my father stood in the hallway. He said nothing. Kyle looked over his shoulder from the dining room, then turned away. And here's what Nora told me later, in a voice so steady it broke me worse than crying would have. She looked past my mother into the dining room and counted. 12 chairs around that table. One of them was empty. The door closed. The wreath shook once, then stilled. The Nat King Cole kept playing inside. My daughter stood on that porch alone, holding a bag of gifts nobody wanted, and she didn't cry. She just turned around and started walking. It was 28 degrees. I know because I checked the weather log afterward. December 25th, Richmond, Virginia, 6 p.m. 28 degrees Fahrenheit, wind chill 22, light flurries. The kind of cold that finds the gaps in your coat and stays there. Nora walked 1.7 miles from my parents' house to our apartment. I mapped it later on my phone, standing in the kitchen, staring at the little blue line on the screen like it could explain something. 1.7 miles. Past houses with wreaths and electric candles in every window. Past living rooms where families were sitting together. down Mechanicsville Turnpike where the streetlights are spaced too far apart and the sidewalk disappears for a stretch near the auto shop. She carried the tote bag the whole way, every gift. She didn't leave them on the porch like my mother told her to. She brought them home. The newspaper wrapping was damp from the snow by the time she got inside. The apartment was dark. I'd turned the heat down to 60 before I left. No point warming an empty place, I'd thought, since Nora would be at my parents' house all evening. She unlocked the door, turned on one lamp, and sat on the edge of her bed in her coat. She tried to call me at 5:43. No answer. I was in a trauma bay. She called again at 5:45. Voicemail. At 5:47, she called Maggie. Maggie picked up on the second ring. She told me later that when she heard Nora's voice, calm, small, precise, she grabbed her keys before the sentence was finished. At 5:52, Nora left me a voicemail. 23 seconds. I've listened to it more times than I'll ever admit. Mom, Grandma said there's no room. I walked home. I'm okay. I'm in the apartment. Merry Christmas, Mom. Maggie pulled into our parking lot at 6:02. She took a photo when she walked in. I have it. Timestamp, 6:02 p.m. Nora sitting on the bed, still wearing her coat, the tote bag of gifts on the floor beside her. One lamp on, the rest of the apartment dark. Maggie wrapped Nora in a blanket, turned the heat up, and drove her to Maggie's house for the night. By 6:30, Nora was eating leftover lasagna at Maggie's kitchen table with Maggie's cat in her lap. She was safe. But I didn't know any of that yet. I was still in the ER, checking vitals, charting notes, assuming my daughter was sitting at my parents' table, opening gifts beside a Christmas tree in a warm house full of people who loved her. I checked my phone at 10:32 p.m. during my 15-minute break. 3 missed calls from Maggie, 1 voicemail from Nora, 0 calls, 0 texts from my mother, 0 from my father, 0 from Kyle. I listened to the voicemail first. 23 seconds. I stood in the staff break room with my back against a cold steel locker and listened to my 10-year-old daughter wish me Merry Christmas from an apartment she should never have been in that night. Her voice was steady, a little thin, not crying, worse than crying because it meant she'd already decided this was something she was supposed to handle on her own. I played it again, then one more time because some part of me was waiting for it to stop being real. Then I called Maggie. She answered immediately. She's fine, she's asleep, she's at my place. And then, quietly, Audrey, she walked home, alone, in the dark, on Christmas. Maggie had already sent me the photo by text. I opened it. My daughter, still in her coat, sitting on the bed, one lamp on, that bag of gifts on the floor. Timestamp, 6:02 p.m., December 25th. I looked at that image for a long time. I looked at the way the light hit only half her face, and the way the rest of the apartment behind her was just nothing. Dark furniture, no tree, no music, no people. I said, "Thank you, Maggie. I'll finish my shift." She paused. "Audrey, I'll finish my shift," I said again. And I did. I went back to the floor. I charted meds and changed dressings and spoke to patients in the calm, even voice they train you to use when everything is falling apart and you are the one person in the room who cannot afford to show it. I did not call my mother. I did not call my father. I did not call Kyle. There was nothing left to discuss. From that point on, there was only paperwork. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I sat in my car in the hospital garage for maybe 4 minutes. Engine running, heat on, phone in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at one name. Ruth Ashford. I didn't call yet. Not at 6 in the morning. But I would. And when I did, things would begin moving in a direction my parents had never once imagined, because they had spent 18 years in a house they thought was theirs, and they had never bothered to read the paperwork that said otherwise. My mother called me at 8:14 the next morning, December 26th. I know the exact time because I was recording. Virginia is a one-party consent state. That means as long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's legal. I knew. I pressed record before I pressed answer. I'd learned that much from working intake in the ER. When things are about to go sideways, you document first and feel later. Audrey. Her voice was light, almost cheerful. I heard Nora went home last night. I'm not sure what happened. I told her to wait 10 minutes while I rearranged things, and she just left. You know how kids are. So dramatic. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. Then, Mom, Nora called me at 5:52. She said you told her there was no room. She walked home. Shift. I heard it. A recalibration. The gears turning behind that polished voice. Well, it was chaotic, Audrey. Kyle's mother-in-law showed up last minute. I had to make a decision. What was I supposed to do? Kick out an elderly guest for a child? You kicked out a 10-year-old. Silence. 4 seconds this time. Then Janet's third gear. Offense. Don't start with me, Audrey. I have been supporting you through your mess, housing you, watching your child, covering for you, and this is the thanks I get? You're just like your father's side. Ungrateful, every one of you. Her voice was climbing now, not loud, but sharp. The way a blade doesn't need to be big. And let me tell you something. If you make this into a thing, don't expect us to show up at your custody hearing. Don't expect a roof. Don't expect anything. 7 minutes and 23 seconds. I recorded all of it, including the last thing she said before she hung up. The thing she probably thought was a threat, but that I filed away as evidence. You do anything stupid, Audrey, and I will make sure that judge knows exactly what kind of mother you are. I set the phone on the kitchen counter. I looked at the recording file. 7:23, December 26, 8:14 a.m., and I saved it to a folder I'd just created. I named the folder Receipts. Kyle started texting at 8:45, not a phone call. That would require hearing my voice, and Kyle had never been comfortable with anything that couldn't be done from a safe distance. 8:45 a.m. Mom told me you made a big deal about last night. Seriously? 8:47 a.m. Nora is fine. Kids walk home all the time. Stop being dramatic. 8:52 a.m. You need to apologize to Mom. She's crying. 9:01 a.m. If you push this, I swear I'll tell your ex's lawyer you're unstable. I didn't respond to any of them. I screenshotted every single one. Each one went into the folder. By mid-morning, the machine was running. Janet had already called her sister, my Aunt Diane, and delivered her version. Audrey abandoned Nora at our house, then blamed us for it. Aunt Diane called me at 10:15, voice soft with concern that wasn't really for me. Sweetie, your mom is just devastated. Can't you let this go? It's Christmas. Did she tell you Nora walked home alone in the dark? A pause. She said Nora left on her own. Nora is 10, Aunt Diane. Another pause, longer. She didn't have an answer for that, so she said she'd pray for the family and hung up. I was putting my phone down when it buzzed one more time. Kyle again. But this message was different. The kind of mistake that only happens when someone is texting 2 conversations at once and sends the wrong one to the wrong person. 9:22 a.m. from Kyle, meant for Janet. Don't worry, Mom, she won't do anything. She needs us for the custody thing. She's trapped. I read it twice, then I screenshotted it, opened the receipts folder, and saved it right below the others. He was right about one thing. I did need them. For 9 more days. The custody hearing was January 3rd. After that, the leash came off. But Kyle didn't know about the leash. He only knew about the trap. And people who think you're trapped, stop watching what they say. I should give you some history, because what happened at Christmas didn't come out of nowhere. It was the loudest note in a song that had been playing my entire life. In the Ashford family, there were 2 kinds of children, the investment and the expense. Kyle was the investment, I was the expense. Kyle dropped out of community college after 3 semesters. My parents had paid every dime of his tuition. I put myself through nursing school on federal loans and a waitressing job that left my feet swollen by midnight. When I graduated, my mother said, "Well, at least you finished something." When Kyle got a job selling cars, she threw him a dinner party. When I got married, Janet told me to keep it simple. An outdoor ceremony is fine, Audrey. No need to go overboard. Budget. Whatever I could scrape together. When Kyle married Tiffany 2 years later, my mother booked a venue with a chandelier and a 3-tier cake and wrote a check for $15,000. She called it an investment in his future. When my marriage fell apart, she said, "A woman should know how to keep her husband." When Kyle and Tiffany nearly separated, that bad stretch with the credit card debt, she said, "Tiffany needs to learn patience." And then there was how they treated Nora. Kyle's 2 kids, Braden, 5, and Harper, 3, were my babies. Janet posted them on Facebook every week, matching outfits at Easter, pumpkin patch in October, my mother's grandchildren front and center. Nora was Audrey's kid, or sometimes just the girl. Last Christmas, the one before this, Nora had been placed at a folding card table in the hallway while everyone else sat at the main table. When she asked why, my mother said, "The big table is for immediate family, Nora." Nora looked at her. "Am I not immediate family?" My mother changed the subject. I swallowed it. I was 2 months into the divorce filing, sleeping on a couch, and terrified that one wrong move would cost me my daughter in family court. So I swallowed it the way I'd been swallowing things from that family for 30 years. But someone else heard about that moment. Through a phone call I didn't even know had happened. Grandma Ruth. She'd heard, and she hadn't said a word. Not yet. She was waiting. I just didn't know for what. Let me tell you about the house. It was a 3-story colonial on a tree-lined street in the near suburbs of Richmond. White siding, black shutters, wraparound porch. My great-grandmother Ruth bought it in 1987 with cash from 40 years of bookkeeping and a pension from the Henrico County school system. She raised her son, my grandfather, there. When he passed in 2003, she stayed another 2 years. In 2005, she set up a living trust, put the house in it, and named herself trustee. The trust document had one guiding clause I wouldn't read until much later. The property shall serve the family, all members, without exclusion. In 2012, Grandma Ruth moved to a nursing home in Charlottesville. Janet and Gerald moved in. No lease, no rent. Just a verbal understanding that they'd look after the place. Kyle and Tiffany took the upstairs 3 years after that. Also free. Also no lease. 18 years my parents had lived in that house without paying $1. And somewhere along the way, they'd started talking about it like it was theirs. Our home. The family home. The house we've poured our lives into. As if the woman who actually bought it, the woman sitting in a nursing home 60 miles away, had simply vanished. But there was the basement. A finished space that used to be the family room where I'd watched movies with Grandma Ruth as a kid. 3 years ago, Janet had it renovated. New lock on the door, separate entrance from the side yard. She told everyone the basement was damp and unsafe. She told Grandma Ruth it had a mold problem. Nobody went down there. That night, December 26th, after Kyle's wrong number text and Aunt Diane's phone call, I opened the Airbnb app on my phone and typed in my parents' address. It took 4 seconds. Cozy Basement Suite, Richmond, Virginia. 47 reviews, Superhost badge, $89 a night. Host name, Janet A. I scrolled through the listing photos, and there it was, Grandma Ruth's old basement, the one with the wood-paneled walls and the brick fireplace. New furniture, new linens, a little basket of toiletries on the nightstand. 47 5-star reviews in a house that didn't belong to her. In a basement she'd told a 90-year-old woman was too dangerous to enter. I screenshotted everything. The listing, the reviews, the pricing, the host profile. Timestamp, December 26, 11:30 p.m. Then I closed the app, set my phone on the kitchen counter, and sat in the quiet for a long time. Tomorrow morning, I was going to call Grandma Ruth. I called at 7:15 a.m. on December 27th. Early, but Grandma Ruth had been a dawn riser her whole life, and the nursing home staff told me once she was usually dressed and reading by 6:30. She picked up on the third ring, that voice, hoarse, thin, but precise in a way that age hadn't touched. Like a blade that had been sharpened so many times it was narrow, but still cut clean. "Audrey, you're calling early. What happened?" I told her. All of it. Nora at the door, the no-room excuse, the walk home, the dark apartment, the voicemail. Grandma Ruth went silent. Not the silence of someone who didn't hear. The silence of someone counting. I waited. 10 seconds. I know because I counted too. Then she spoke, and her voice hadn't changed a fraction. "That house has 12 chairs and a table that seats 14, Audrey. I bought every single one of them." I told her about the Airbnb listing, the basement, the 47 reviews, The $89 a night under Janet's name. Another silence. 5 seconds this time. So she is making money off my house and turning away my great-grandchild at the door on Christmas. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Audrey, do you have that screenshot? The listing? Yes, ma'am. Good. I'm calling Martin this morning. Martin Haywood, Grandma Ruth's estate attorney in Charlottesville. He'd set up the trust in 2005 and handled every update since. I'd met him once, years ago. Quiet, careful, the kind of man who wore the same gray suit every day and never forgot a clause. Before she hung up, Grandma Ruth said one more thing. I already knew something was wrong, Audrey. Last Christmas, Nora called me to say Merry Christmas, and she told me, Grandma Ruth, I sat alone at the little table. I asked Janet about it. Janet said Nora preferred it that way. A breath. I believed her. I will not believe her again. That morning, while my mother was posting leftover Christmas photos on Facebook, the ones from the dinner table Nora wasn't allowed to sit at, captioned Blessed Family Time, a woman 90 miles away in a Charlottesville nursing home was on the phone with her attorney, and the clock had started. Martin Haywood called me at 2:15 that afternoon. His voice was what I expected, measured, unhurried, the kind of tone that doesn't waste words because each one has already been weighed. Ms. Ashford, your great-grandmother has briefed me on the situation. I've reviewed the trust documents. I want to walk you through where things stand. He spoke for maybe 4 minutes. This is what he said, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly because I wrote it down on the back of a grocery receipt while standing in my kitchen. The house was held in the Ruth Ashford Revocable Living Trust, established 2005. Grandma Ruth was the sole trustee. Janet and Gerald had no lease, no deed, no ownership interest of any kind. They were what the law calls permissive occupants, people allowed to stay at the owner's pleasure, and that pleasure could be revoked with 30 days written notice. Virginia statute, black and white. Your grandmother has instructed me to do 2 things, Martin said. First, prepare a 30-day notice to vacate, addressed to Janet and Gerald Ashford. Second, draft an amendment to the trust, removing Janet and Gerald as beneficiaries and naming you as sole beneficiary, with Nora as contingent beneficiary. I leaned against the counter. How soon? The notice will go out by certified mail tomorrow, December 28th. I'll bring the amendment to your grandmother's facility tomorrow morning for signature. I've already arranged a notary and 2 witnesses from the nursing home staff. I said yes. Then he added something that made me grip the edge of the counter. Ms. Ashford, there's the secondary matter. If Janet has been generating rental income from trust property without the trustee's knowledge or consent, that may constitute conversion of trust property income. I'll need you to send me everything you have. The listing, the screenshots, the reviews, all of it. I sent the folder that night. Every screenshot, every timestamp, labeled and organized the way I label patient charts. Because when you've spent a decade in medicine, you learn that documentation isn't just a habit, it's a survival skill. Martin's reply came at 9:47 p.m. Received. This is comprehensive. We'll proceed in the morning. Somewhere in Richmond, my mother was probably watching television in a house she didn't own, sleeping in rooms she hadn't paid for, spending money she'd skimmed from a basement she'd lied about. And she had no idea that by this time tomorrow, her name would be crossed off a legal document and replaced with mine. December 28th. I drove to Charlottesville with Nora in the back seat. 1 hour on I-64, winter sun flat and white through the windshield. Nora didn't ask where we were going. I'd told her we were visiting Grandma Ruth, and her face had lit up the way it used to before Christmas, stopped being a word that made her happy. The nursing home smelled like it always did, lemon disinfectant, and cafeteria coffee, and something floral the staff sprayed in the hallways that never quite covered the rest. Grandma Ruth was in the common room, sitting in her wheelchair with her back straight, wearing a blue cardigan buttoned to the top. Martin Haywood stood beside her in his gray suit, a leather folder open on the table. Next to him, a woman with a notary stamp and 2 nursing home staff members I recognized, Linda from reception and a CNA named Terrence, who'd always been kind to Grandma Ruth. Nora saw her first. Grandma Ruth! Grandma Ruth's face changed. The sharpness softened, just around the eyes. She held her arms open. Come here, little son. Nora hugged her, careful the way kids learn to be careful with people who are small and old and precious. Grandma Ruth held her for a long moment, one hand on the back of Nora's head. Then she leaned back and looked at her. "Did you have a good Christmas, honey?" Nora hesitated, looked at me, looked back at Grandma Ruth. "It's okay," Grandma Ruth said. "The next one will be different. I promise you that." Then she turned to Martin and nodded once. "Business." Martin read the amendment summary aloud. Steady, formal, every word precise enough for a courtroom. Janet Ashford and Gerald Ashford, removed as beneficiaries. Audrey Ashford, named sole beneficiary. Nora Ashford, named contingent beneficiary. The house, the trust assets, the whole structure Grandma Ruth had built over 40 years of careful saving, redirected. Grandma Ruth signed with a hand that shook slightly, but never hesitated. The notary stamped. Linda and Terence signed as witnesses. Martin slid the 30-day notice across the table next. Grandma Ruth signed that too. Then she asked for a piece of paper. Not the legal kind, just a sheet of lined notebook paper from Linda's desk. She wrote in a hand that was looser than it used to be, but still legible, still hers. "Janet, I gave you my home so my family would always have a place. You turned away a child on Christmas. That is not what my home is for. Ruth." She folded it, slid it into the envelope with the notice, and looked at Martin. "Send it." Martin sealed the envelope, addressed it. "Certified mail, return receipt requested." Before we left, Grandma Ruth held my hand, her grip still surprisingly firm, and said something I carry with me. "I'm 89, Audrey. I've buried a husband, a son, and 2 friends this year alone. But I am not too old to protect what's mine. And Nora is mine." By 4 p.m. that afternoon, a sealed envelope was sitting in a blue USPS collection box outside the Charlottesville post office, addressed to Janet and Gerald Ashford, stamped certified, and heading south toward Richmond. That night, after Nora was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and the apartment quiet around me. The radiator ticked, the faucet dripped, and I built a case. I organized the receipts folder the way I organize patient charts at the hospital. Chronological, labeled, nothing missing, nothing out of order. Every file had a date, a source, and a one-line description. The voicemail, 23 seconds, December 25th, 5:52 p.m. The photo Maggie took, Nora on the bed in a dark apartment, timestamp 6:02 p.m. The recording of Janet's phone call, 7 minutes 23 seconds, December 26th, 8:14 a.m. Kyle's texts, all 5 of them, including the one he sent to the wrong person. Aunt Diane's call, noted with time and summary. The Airbnb listing, 47 reviews, $89 per night, host name Janet A., superhost. The listing photos, Grandma Ruth's basement with new furniture, new linens, and a basket of complimentary toiletries in a room an 89-year-old woman had been told was too damp to enter. I pulled up the reviews and read through them, one by one, looking for details. Most were routine. Clean space, great location, responsive host. But one, posted 6 months earlier, caught my eye. Wonderful stay. Janet even showed us family photos in the living room. Such a warm, welcoming home. Family photos. In the living room. She'd invited strangers into Grandma Ruth's house, shown them our family pictures on the wall, and played the gracious hostess. All while making money she had no right to, in a home she had no claim to, with photographs of a family she'd just shut the door on. I emailed Martin the full folder at 11:15 p.m. His reply came at 11:47. Received. I'll include the Airbnb documentation in the supplementary demand letter. The demand letter. That was the second envelope, the one Martin said he'd send after the first one landed. The notice would tell my parents to leave. The demand letter would tell them how much they owed. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for a while, listening to the radiator and the faucet and the sound of Nora breathing in the next room. 2 envelopes. One was already in the mail. The other was being drafted, and my parents didn't know about either. January 3rd. 9 days after Christmas, the day the lock came off. Richmond Family Court, 2nd floor, courtroom 2B. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, the American flag hanging limp beside the judge's bench. I sat at the petitioner's table in a navy blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop and pressed the night before, my attorney beside me. Ryan sat across the aisle with his lawyer, arms crossed, jaw tight, looking at me like I was a problem he'd already solved in his head. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. My attorney presented the file: stable employment, 12 years as an ER nurse at St. Mary's, current lease on the apartment, character references from 2 supervisors and Nora's school counselor. A letter, the one Martin had prepared, confirming that I would be moving into a family-owned property in the near future as beneficiary of the Ruth Ashford Revocable Living Trust. Stable housing, stable income, stable life. Ryan's attorney tried to argue instability, the small apartment, the night shifts, the divorce itself. But he had nothing concrete, no evidence of harm, no evidence of neglect, and the one card my mother had threatened to play, calling me an unfit mother, never materialized. Janet didn't show up. She didn't submit a statement. I don't know if she chose not to, or if she was too busy dealing with the certified mail envelope that had arrived at her door that very morning. USPS tracking confirmed. Delivered January 3rd, 1:23 p.m., signed by J. Ashford. The judge ruled at 10:40 a.m., full physical custody to me. Ryan would have scheduled visitation every other weekend and alternating holidays. The judge signed the order, the clerk stamped it, and my attorney handed me a copy. I walked out of that courthouse holding 2 pieces of paper. One said my daughter was mine. The other, the trust amendment, said my silence was over. That same morning, back in Richmond, a mail carrier had walked up my parents' porch steps and left an envelope that required a signature. My mother had signed for it at 1:23 p.m., probably expecting a late Christmas card, or a bill, or one of those charity solicitations she always threw away without reading. She wasn't throwing this one away. Janet called me at 1:47 p.m., 24 minutes after she opened the envelope. I know because I was sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot, still holding the custody order, when my phone rang and her name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times, then I answered. Her voice was different now. Not the smooth, managing Janet from 2 days ago. This was high, unraveled, shaking at the seams like a wall with the studs pulled out. What is this? What did you do? This says we have to leave in 30 days. This is our house, Audrey. I watched a woman cross the parking lot with a stroller, bundled against the cold. I let Janet's words settle into the air between us, and then I said evenly, "It's Grandma Ruth's house. It's always been Grandma Ruth's house. Your grandmother is senile. She doesn't know what she's signing. I will contest this. I will take this to court. She was evaluated by her physician last week, Mom. She's competent. The amendment and the notice are both valid. It's been reviewed." I heard Gerald in the background, muffled, agitated. Then his voice closer, like he'd taken the phone. "Audrey, this is ridiculous. We've lived here for 18 years. You can't just—" "I didn't. Grandma Ruth did. You have 30 days. He went quiet. Janet grabbed the phone back. "Where are we supposed to go?" I let the silence hold for 3 seconds. Then, "I don't know, Mom. Maybe somewhere with enough room." She heard it. I know she heard it, because the line went dead. She didn't hang up gently. She hung up the way people do when the ground shifts under them, and they don't know yet whether it's an earthquake or just the beginning of one. The USPS certified mail receipt was already on file with Martin's office. Delivered, signed, time-stamped. The 30-day clock had started, and there was no unsigned version of that letter, no take-back, no, "let's talk about this over dinner." Just a legal document in a sealed envelope with a handwritten note from an 89-year-old woman who remembered exactly how many chairs were around that table. I started the car, pulled out of the courthouse lot, and drove to pick up my daughter from school. I need to pause here for just a second, because I know some of you are watching this and you've felt it. That moment when someone tells you there's no room for you. If that's you, drop it in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. Because what Janet did next? I still can't believe it. Let me keep going. My mother's first instinct wasn't to apologize. It wasn't to call Grandma Ruth. It wasn't even to call a lawyer. Not yet. Her first instinct was to perform. January 4th, one day after the notice arrived, Janet posted on Facebook. Public. Not friends only. Public. She wanted reach. Please pray for our family. Our eldest daughter has been manipulating her elderly grandmother, a 89-year-old woman in a nursing home, to take away our home. We have poured our hearts and our lives into this house for nearly 2 decades. We are devastated. Please keep us in your thoughts and prayers. 67 reactions, 34 comments, hearts, crying faces, praying hands. Oh, Janet, how awful. Stay strong, honey. Some children don't know what they have until it's gone. One woman from Janet's church group wrote, "This is just heartbreaking. Your family is in our prayers." 3 people called me heartless without knowing my name. Not one of them knew a child had walked home alone in the dark because of the woman they were praying for. Kyle jumped in, his comment pinned under the post, "My sister is trying to steal our inheritance. Don't be fooled." Then Janet called the pastor, Pastor Whitfield, a kind man, genuinely, but a man who only ever heard one side of anything that happened in my mother's orbit. He called me that evening, voice careful, measured. "Audrey, your mother is really struggling. Maybe we could all sit down and—" "Pastor Whitfield, did my mother tell you she turned my 10-year-old daughter away from Christmas dinner?" Pause. She said it was a misunderstanding. I have the voicemail my daughter left me from an empty apartment that night. It's 23 seconds long. Would you like to hear it? He didn't answer that question. He said he'd pray for the situation. I thanked him and hung up. I screenshotted the Facebook post, the comments, Kyle's reply, the timestamps. All of it went into the receipts folder. I did not post a response. I did not comment. I did not correct a single person publicly. There would be a time for the truth to be heard. But it wouldn't be on Facebook, and it wouldn't be on my mother's terms. Martin was already drafting the second letter. The first week of January felt like standing in an open field while something circled overhead. 4 relatives called me in 5 days. Every one of them had talked to Janet first. Every one of them used the same script, like they'd been handed a pamphlet at the door. "Just apologize, Audrey. Think about your parents' age. You're tearing this family apart." Aunt Diane called again. "Sweetie, can't you just come to dinner and sort this out? Your mom is beside herself." I said, "Diane, did she tell you about the Airbnb listing? The one where she rented out Grandma Ruth's basement for 3 years without telling her?" Diane went quiet. Then, I don't know anything about that." Then she said she had to go. Nobody asked about Nora. Not once. Not a single relative, in 5 days of phone calls, asked how a 10-year-old was doing after being told she didn't belong at her own family's Christmas table. Tuesday night, Maggie came by after our shifts overlapped. She brought pizza and a bottle of cheap wine and sat on my kitchen counter like she'd done since we were 22. Nora was already in bed. "You're not crazy," Maggie said, chewing crust. "You're not the villain. That voicemail exists. Those screenshots exist. Reality is not up for a vote." Grandma Ruth called every evening that week. Short calls, 2-3 minutes. Her voice steady like a handrail on a staircase you're afraid to climb. "Martin is handling it. You just hold on." One night, she told me something I hadn't heard before. In 1978, my mother-in-law told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving dinner. She said I didn't cook well enough to sit at her table. I was 28 with a baby. I remember the walk to the car. I remember the cold. Her voice thinned, just slightly. I swore no woman in my family would feel that again. I'm keeping that promise. That same night, I was tucking Nora in when she said it. Quiet. Not dramatic. Not tearful. Just the words, laid on the pillow like a question she'd been carrying too long. "Mom, does Grandma not like me because I'm a problem?" I held her. I held my daughter in that small bedroom with the radiator ticking and the city humming outside, and I said, "You are not a problem. You have never, ever been a problem." She nodded into my shoulder. She didn't ask again. But I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, and I made a decision that was already made. This would never happen to her again. Not from them. Not from anyone. Janet hired a lawyer in the second week of January. Not an estate attorney, not a trust specialist. a general practitioner from a strip mall office off Midlothian Turnpike, whose website had a stock photo of a gavel and the tagline, "Fighting for Your Rights." His name was Gary Luskin, and his first move was to send Martin a letter on letterhead, so thin you could read through it. My clients, Janet and Gerald Ashford, have established continuous residency at the above address for 18 years. They have maintained the property, paid utilities, and made improvements consistent with an implied tenancy. The 30-day notice issued by your client is defective and unenforceable. Martin called me the next morning. If I hadn't known him, I might have mistaken his tone for boredom. But it wasn't boredom. It was the calm of a man who'd been doing this for 3 decades and had seen this letter 100 times before. Implied tenancy requires evidence of rent payment or a written lease. Your parents have neither. They are permissive occupants. The notice stands. Martin's reply to Luskin was 4 pages. Attached, a certified copy of the trust deed showing Ruth Ashford as sole owner and trustee. A physician's letter from Dr. Rivera at the nursing home confirming Grandma Ruth's cognitive competency. The signed, notarized trust amendment. And, like a grenade tucked politely into the last exhibit, a summary of the Airbnb listing, the Superhost badge, the 47 reviews, and an estimated income calculation. The final paragraph of Martin's letter read, "Should your clients wish to dispute this notice in court, we are prepared to file an unlawful detainer action. We also intend to pursue a separate claim for conversion of trust property income in the estimated amount of $52,000. We welcome the opportunity to present the Airbnb revenue documentation before a judge." Martin told me what happened next. Luskin called him, not in writing this time, on the phone. The bluster was gone. "Mr. Haywood, I need to be honest with my clients. If you can prove that Airbnb income..." Martin: "It's on the internet, Mr. Luskin. It has 47 reviews." The line went quiet for a long time after that. Then, Luskin said he'd advise his clients to consider their options. 2 days later, I learned from Kyle that Janet's lawyer had strongly recommended she not contest the notice. She fired him anyway. Not because he was wrong, because he'd said a thing she didn't want to hear out loud. Kyle called me on a Wednesday in mid-January. I almost didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because his name on my screen had come to feel like a weather alert for a storm I was already standing in. But I picked up, and the voice on the other end was different. The swagger was gone. What was left sounded like someone who'd just done the math and didn't like the total. "Audrey, listen. I didn't know about the Airbnb thing. That was all Mom. I just live here. You can't put me out on the street. I have 2 kids. Kyle, you've lived in a house you don't own, rent-free, for 5 years. You told me I was trapped. You threatened to call my ex's lawyer. And you sat at that table on Christmas while your 10-year-old niece was told there was no room for her. Don't call me about your kids." Silence. Then the old Kyle flickered back. "This is insane. You're using an old woman to get back at us. Grandma Ruth doesn't even know what she's signing." She knew exactly what she was signing. She said 12 chairs and a table for 14. She counted. She remembers. He hung up. 20 minutes later, I saw the message on the family group chat. "Kyle, in all caps, Audrey is destroying this family. She has turned great-grandma against us. This is elder abuse. Elder abuse. Because a 90-year-old woman had decided to protect a 10-year-old one." I screenshotted it, sent it to Martin. His reply was 2 sentences. "Noted. Mrs. Ruth's physician affidavit and the notary witnesses will address any competency challenge. Let them file if they'd like." What Kyle didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Grandma Ruth had already anticipated this. Back on December 28th, when Martin brought the amendment to the nursing home, he'd also brought a signed affidavit from Dr. Rivera. It stated, in medical language, that left no room for reinterpretation, that Ruth Eleanor Ashford was alert, oriented to person, place, time, and situation, and fully competent to manage her legal and financial affairs. Dated, signed, notarized, filed with the trust documents. My mother called me a manipulator. My brother called it elder abuse. But the paper trail told a different story. And paper doesn't flinch when you raise your voice at it. At the end of January, 3 weeks into the 30-day notice, Janet drove to Charlottesville. I wasn't there. I didn't learn the details until Grandma Ruth told me that evening, and Martin confirmed the rest through the nursing home's incident report, which he'd requested a copy of. So I'm telling you what happened the way it was told to me, by two people who had no reason to embellish. Janet walked into the nursing home lobby at 11:40 a.m. She was wearing what she always wore to make an impression, the beige wool coat, the pearl studs, the look of a woman who volunteered at church and expected every door to open accordingly. She approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Ruth Ashford. I'm her granddaughter-in-law." Linda, the same Linda who had witnessed the trust amendment signing, looked at her screen, then back at Janet. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Ms. Ruth has updated her visitor authorization list. Your name is not on it." Janet's smile didn't break, not right away. "There must be a mistake. I've known her for 30 years. I'm family." "I understand, ma'am, but we follow the residents' expressed wishes. I'm not able to authorize this visit." The smile cracked. Janet asked for a supervisor. The supervisor said the same thing, politely, firmly, the way healthcare workers learn to do when someone powerful is not used to being told no. Janet began to cry, or at least to produce the sounds and posture of crying. She stayed in the lobby for 12 minutes. When it became clear that tears were not going to unlock the door, the supervisor said, "Ma'am, if you're unable to leave on your own, we'll need to contact security." Janet left. From the parking lot, she called Gerald. I know this because Grandma Ruth heard from Linda what Janet said in the lobby on her way out, loud enough that 3 other visitors turned around. "That girl has poisoned her against us." Then Janet tried something else. She called Grandma Ruth directly. Grandma Ruth answered. She told me she let Janet talk for about 15 seconds, the usual opening. "Grandma Ruth, please, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We love you, we would never—" Then Grandma Ruth spoke. "There was no misunderstanding, Janet. You turned away a child, my great-grandchild, on Christmas, in my house, and then you rented out my basement for money you never told me about." Janet started to stammer. "That's not— I was going to— This conversation is over. Talk to Martin." And she hung up. The nursing home visitor log, stamped, dated with Linda's initials, recorded Janet's visit and denial. The staff incident report noted in clinical language, visitor became verbally agitated in lobby, declined to leave when asked, departed after security was mentioned, no physical incident. One more piece of paper, one more timestamp, one more entry in a file that was getting thicker by the day. The second envelope arrived on February 3rd, certified mail, return receipt requested. Same process, same mailman, same porch steps. But this time it wasn't a notice to vacate, it was a demand letter, and the number at the bottom had a comma in it. Martin had spent 2 weeks building the financial case. He'd submitted a third-party subpoena request to Airbnb through their legal compliance portal, standard procedure for trust attorneys investigating unauthorized use of trust assets. What came back was a full earnings statement for the host account registered to Janet A., linked to the property address. 3 years of booking records, payout amounts, calendar availability, occupancy rates, total gross income deposited into Janet's personal bank account from Airbnb rentals of Grandma Ruth's basement, $52,340. The demand letter was on Martin's letterhead. 3 pages, clean, clinical. The kind of document that doesn't raise its voice, because it doesn't need to. It cited the trust clause granting exclusive authority over trust property to the trustee. It cited Virginia law on conversion of trust property income. And it requested, in language so polite it almost sounded like a suggestion, full restitution of $52,340 within 60 days, or the trust would file a civil lawsuit. Attached, the Airbnb earnings statement, the listing screenshots, the 47 reviews, the archived listing from the Wayback Machine, because Janet had quietly deleted the Airbnb page 2 days earlier, thinking that if she erased the listing, she erased the evidence. She was wrong. The internet has a memory that outlasts good intentions and bad ones alike. Janet didn't call me this time. She didn't call anyone, as far as I know, but Gerald did. He called me that evening, and for the first time in my entire life, my father sounded like a man who understood that the floor he was standing on had never belonged to him. "Audrey," his voice was thin, "we don't have $52,000. Your mother, She spent it. The truck for Kyle. Credit cards. A cruise last year. It's gone. That's between you and Grandma Ruth's lawyer, Dad. Silence. Then very quietly. What happens if we can't pay? Then Martin files. I heard him exhale. Not anger. Something more like the sound a structure makes when the last supporting wall gives way. He said, "Okay," and hung up. $52,000. That's how much it cost my parents to turn away a 10-year-old on Christmas. Except they didn't pay it. They spent it. On a truck, on a cruise, on a life that was never theirs to fund. And now the receipt had arrived. What happened next, I pieced together from 3 sources. A voicemail Gerald left me at 2 a.m. that he probably didn't remember leaving. A text exchange between Kyle and Tiffany that Tiffany forwarded to me weeks later. And one very awkward phone call from Tiffany herself. The Ashford family, the one my mother had spent 30 years curating for the outside world. The Facebook posts, the church potlucks, the matching sweater Christmas photos, began to eat itself from the inside. It started with Kyle. He'd finally done what he should have done years ago. He looked at the numbers. The truck his mother had given him. $28,000. The gift she'd made toward his apartment deposit. $8,000. He'd always assumed these came from his parents' retirement savings or Gerald's pension. They didn't. They came from a basement that wasn't Janet's, in a house that wasn't Janet's, rented to strangers on a platform tied to Janet's bank account. Kyle called Janet. I wasn't on the line, but Tiffany told me later how it went. "Mom, you told me Dad's pension paid for all of this." "Don't you dare question me, Kyle. After everything I've done for you. You used stolen money to buy my truck?" The word stolen landed hard enough that Janet didn't speak for 5 seconds. Then she did what she always did. She pivoted to Gerald. "If your father had been any kind of man, I wouldn't have had to—" Gerald, apparently, had had enough. "You rented the basement, Janet. You spent the money. Don't put this on me." It was the first time, according to Kyle, that Gerald had ever contradicted Janet in front of anyone, but it was also 20 years too late, and they both knew it. Tiffany called me the following day, polite, nervous, her voice pitched a half-step too high. "Audrey, I know we haven't been close, but Kyle and I didn't know about the Airbnb money. Is there any way you could talk to the lawyer? Maybe work something out?" "Tiffany, I'm sorry you're in this position, but the trust belongs to Grandma Ruth. You'll need to talk to her attorney." She thanked me and hung up. I think she was hoping for mercy. I think she deserved some, honestly. But mercy wasn't mine to give. It was Grandma Ruth's, and Grandma Ruth had already given it for 18 years. She was done. That week, Janet made one more Facebook post, shorter this time. "When your own family betrays you." 12 reactions, 3 comments, and then a 4th, from someone I didn't recognize, someone who had apparently been a guest in that basement. "Janet, I've been to your place. Is that the same basement listed on Airbnb? I thought your grandmother owned that house." 2 hours later, the post was deleted, but I'd already taken the screenshot. The family that had presented a united front at every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every church potluck, the one that smiled in matching sweaters while a little girl sat alone at a folding table, was dissolving. Not because I tore it apart, because the truth did. I know this has been a lot, but we're almost to the end. And honestly, what happened on move-out day is the part even I didn't see coming. If you're still here, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Have you ever watched someone's public image fall apart when the truth finally came out? Stay with me. The 30-day deadline fell on February 2nd. I know because I'd counted every single one of those days the way a nurse counts drip rates, precisely, with a quiet awareness that the wrong number could change everything. Martin emailed me the evening before. "Deadline is tomorrow. If they don't vacate, I'll file the unlawful detainer action with the General District Court on Monday morning." I drove by the house that afternoon. I didn't stop. I didn't pull into the driveway. I just slowed down as I passed, the way you slow past an accident on the highway, not because you want to look, but because something in you needs to know. Both cars were in the driveway, lights on in the kitchen. The wreath from Christmas was still on the door, dried out, browning at the edges. Nobody had taken it down. They weren't leaving. That evening, Janet texted me. Not a phone call this time. Just 6 words on a screen. We're not leaving. This is home. I forwarded it to Martin. His reply. Filing Monday. Kyle at least had read the room. He and Tiffany had found an apartment in Short Pump. Small, 1 bath. The deposit paid by Tiffany's parents. Kyle had texted me the day before, his last message in what had become a very short thread. I moved out. I'm done with this. But you should know. Mom is telling people you're going to have her arrested. I didn't respond. That same week, I'd noticed that the Airbnb listing had vanished from the platform. Janet had deleted it, scrubbed the page, removed the photos, taken down the reviews. She probably thought that if the listing didn't exist, the evidence didn't either. But Martin's paralegal had already captured the full listing through the Wayback Machine. Archived pages, cached reviews, host profile, everything. And the Airbnb earnings statement, obtained through the legal subpoena, existed independently of the website. You can delete a listing. You can't delete a bank deposit. Monday morning, Martin Haywood walked into the General District Court in Richmond carrying a filing folder 3 inches thick. And inside that folder was 30 days' worth of silence, 47 reviews worth of evidence, and one 89-year-old woman's refusal to let her family be redefined by the people who'd stolen from it. The filing went in on a Monday. Martin submitted the unlawful detainer action with every exhibit attached. The trust deed, the 30-day notice with its certified mail receipt and USPS tracking confirmation, the physician's capacity letter, the trust amendment, and, as a supplementary exhibit, the full Airbnb documentation. The clerk stamped it, assigned a case number, and scheduled the hearing for 10 days out. Virginia moves fast on unlawful detainer. The law doesn't like ambiguity about who owns a house and who doesn't. Wednesday afternoon, a process server walked up the porch steps of Grandma Ruth's house and knocked on the front door. Gerald opened it. The server handed him 2 copies of the summons, one for him, one for Janet, and had him sign the acknowledgement of service. Gerald looked at the papers, then at the server, then back at the papers. His face, the server noted in the affidavit of service filed the next day, went gray. Janet wasn't home. She was at the grocery store, which meant Gerald had to deliver the news himself. I don't know exactly what that conversation looked like, and I don't need to. I know the result. Janet called Pastor Whitfield. She called Aunt Diane. She called 2 cousins. She worked the phones like she always did, pulling the levers of sympathy she'd installed over 30 years of casseroles and prayer chains. But this time, the machine didn't respond the way it used to. Pastor Whitfield told her gently that he'd spoken with me and heard the voicemail. He suggested reflection. Aunt Diane didn't pick up. One cousin asked, "Janet, is it true about the Airbnb thing?" And Janet hung up on her. And then there was Mrs. Palmer. Dorothy Palmer, 71, lived 3 doors down from Grandma Ruth's house. She'd been there almost as long as the house itself. She'd watched Janet and Gerald come and go for 18 years, and she had seen something on Christmas night that she hadn't understood until now. She called me that Thursday evening. Her voice was soft, Virginian, cautious in the way people are when they're about to say something that's been sitting in their chest for 5 weeks. "Audrey, honey, I need to tell you something. Christmas night, I was on my porch bringing in the recycling, and I saw your little girl walking down the sidewalk, alone, carrying a bag, in the cold. I almost called the police. I should have. I didn't know what was happening. I thought maybe she was going to a friend's house but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel right. And I didn't do anything, and I am so sorry." I thanked her. I meant it. And I told her that if she was willing, Martin might ask her to provide a written statement. She said yes before I finished the sentence. The hearing was on a Thursday. General District Court, Richmond. Small courtroom, fluorescent lights, a judge named Honorable Karen Yee, who looked like she'd heard 10,000 cases and remembered the details of every one. Martin sat at the petitioner's table. I sat behind him. On the other side, Janet and Gerald alone, no attorney. Luskin had declined to continue representing them after reviewing the Airbnb evidence, or more precisely, after learning that Martin intended to introduce it in open court. Janet hadn't found a replacement. She sat in her beige wool coat, pearl studs, hands folded in her lap like she was at Sunday service. Gerald stared at the table. Martin presented the case in under 20 minutes. The trust deed, the notice, the certified mail receipt with USPS tracking and Janet's signature, the physician's capacity letter, the trust amendment. And then, as a supplementary exhibit, the Airbnb documentation, the earnings statement, the listing screenshots, the reviews, the archived Wayback Machine capture. Judge Yi reviewed the file. Then she looked at Janet. "Ma'am, do you wish to respond?" Janet stood. She smoothed her coat. "Your Honor, we have maintained that house for 18 years. We are family. This is a family disagreement, and I believe it can be resolved privately." Judge Yi looked at the file again, then back at Janet. "Ma'am, did you receive rental income from the trust property?" Janet's hands tightened on the edge of the table. That was just a small... Did you or did you not receive rental income from property held in a trust for which you are not the trustee?" The courtroom was very quiet. I could hear the ventilation system humming. "Yes," Judge Yi ruled in 11 minutes. "Writ of possession. Janet and Gerald Ashford were ordered to vacate the premises within 10 days. Regarding the Airbnb income, the judge noted that the trust had standing to pursue a civil claim for conversion and recommended the parties either mediate or proceed to circuit court." Janet cried. Not the performative kind she'd deployed in the nursing home lobby. Real tears. The kind that come when you realize the script you've been reading from your entire life doesn't have any more pages. Gerald sat beside her, hands on his knees, looking at the floor. Martin gathered his documents. I stood and walked out through the double doors into the hallway, where the light was gray and flat and unremarkable. No dramatic music, no slow-motion moment, just a woman holding a court order in a manila folder, walking toward the elevator. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The documents spoke for themselves. They always do, when you take the time to keep them. They moved out on a Saturday in mid-February. I know because Maggie drove past the house that afternoon. I'd asked her to, not because I needed to witness it, but because some part of me needed to know it was real. A rented box truck in the driveway. Gerald carrying lamps and boxes. Janet directing him from the porch in her coat, arms crossed, mouth align. Neighbors watched from porches and driveways, the way people do when something private becomes public. Not with glee, just with that quiet, careful attention that comes from knowing a street story just changed. Maggie told me one detail that stayed with me. Janet took everything, the furniture, the kitchenware, Kyle's old trophies from the upstairs shelf, the Christmas dishes she'd used for the dinner Nora wasn't allowed to attend. She took the curtains, she took the bathroom mirror she'd hung over the sink. But she left the photograph. The framed one, Grandma Ruth standing in front of the house in 1987, the writing on the back that said, "For my family." All of them. It was still on the wall when they locked the door behind them. Maggie sent me a text at 3:14 p.m. They're gone. I went to the house the next morning. Nora was with me. The place was cold. They'd turned the thermostat down before they left, one final small act of pettiness in a long catalog of them. The rooms were empty, dusty in the corners, sunlight falling through bare windows onto hardwood floors Grandma Ruth had picked out almost 40 years ago. I found the photograph in the living room, still hanging, slightly crooked. I took it down, wiped the glass with my sleeve, and hung it back, level, center, where it belonged. Janet and Gerald rented a one-bedroom apartment in Midlothian. $1,400 a month, first rent payment in 18 years. The unlawful detainer judgment was now part of their court record, which meant any future landlord who ran a background check would see it. Martin had informed them that the $52,340 claim remained active. If they didn't agree to a repayment plan within 60 days, the trust would file in circuit court. She took the Christmas dishes. She left the photograph. I suppose she knew which one she'd earned and which one she hadn't. We moved in at the end of February. Nora carried her backpack up the porch steps, the same steps she'd stood on Christmas night holding a tote bag full of gifts, and stopped at the front door. She looked at me. I looked at her. "This is ours?" she asked. "This is Grandma Ruth's," I said. "She's letting us take care of it." Nora nodded, like that made perfect sense to her. The way things do when you're 10 and trust hasn't been ruined for you yet, at least not permanently. She picked the upstairs bedroom, the one with the window that looked out over the backyard, where Grandma Ruth had kept a vegetable garden in the 70s. The room was bare, just walls and light, but Nora walked in and spun around once with her arms out like she was testing the space, and I stood in the doorway and watched her and didn't try to name what I was feeling because I knew if I did, I'd lose it. Martin finalized the paperwork. The trust remained in Grandma Ruth's name. She was still trustee, but I was now the named beneficiary and custodian of the property. I would pay the property taxes, maintain the house, carry the insurance. It was responsibility, not a gift. I understood the difference, and I was grateful for it. I called Grandma Ruth that evening on FaceTime. The nursing home staff helped her prop the phone on her tray table. She watched Nora taping a hand-drawn sign to her bedroom door, Nora's room with a little sun in the corner. "The little sun is home," Grandma Ruth said. That week, I enrolled Nora in an art class at the community center on Saturdays. She'd stopped drawing after Christmas, not dramatically, not as a statement, just the way light dims when you close a curtain. She stopped carrying her sketchbook. She stopped putting suns on things. The first Saturday, she came home with a sheet of butcher paper rolled under her arm. She unrolled it on the kitchen table, and I saw what she'd made. A house, with a big table in the center, and 14 chairs drawn carefully around it. Each chair had a name tag. Grandma Ruth, Mom, Co-Maggie, Mrs. Palmer. And in the middle, the chair with the best view of the window, Nora. She didn't draw herself at a little table anymore. She drew herself at the big one, and every chair had a sun on it. I also did something for myself that month, something I probably should have done years earlier. I found a therapist, not because I was broken, but because 30 years of a family like mine leaves patterns you don't even see until someone shows them to you. The first session, I sat in a chair that was nicer than any furniture in my old apartment and told a woman with kind eyes and a box of tissues that I'd spent my whole life trying to be small enough to keep the peace. She said, "And how did that work out?" I almost laughed. "It didn't." "No," she said, "it never does." In March, a letter arrived, not certified, not from a lawyer, just a regular envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front, the loops careful and deliberate the way they always were when she wanted to look composed. I opened it at the kitchen table while Nora was at school. "Audrey, I'm your mother. This has gone far enough. Can we talk?" 8 words. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done to Nora, or what she'd done to Grandma Ruth, or what she'd done with $52,000 that wasn't hers. Just, "Can we talk?" As if the problem was a conversation that hadn't happened, rather than a decade of choices that had. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and put it in the receipts folder. Same folder, same system, same shelf. It lived next to the voicemail transcript and the Airbnb screenshots and the court filing and every other document that told the real story of what family had meant in the Ashford house. I didn't respond. I didn't block her number either. If she wanted to reach me, she could go through Martin. That was the boundary, and the boundary was not a punishment. It was a door that worked the way doors are supposed to. You could knock, but you couldn't just walk in and rearrange the furniture. Grandma Ruth called me the same week. She sounded tired but clear, the way she always did, like someone who had made peace with most things and was working on the rest. She said, "I'm not angry at Janet, Audrey. I'm disappointed. But I won't let disappointment stand above my great-granddaughter's safety. Not ever." Spring came slowly that year. Nora rode her bike on the sidewalk out front. Mrs. Palmer waved from her porch every afternoon and sometimes brought over banana bread. Maggie came by on Fridays with takeout. The radiator in the old apartment didn't tick anymore, because we didn't live there anymore, and I only thought about that sometimes. Late at night, sitting on Grandma Ruth's porch, the same porch where my daughter had stood in the cold 5 months earlier, holding a bag of gifts for people who told her she wasn't worth a chair. I think about what Nora said that night in the apartment, when she asked if she was a problem, and I think about the drawing she made in art class, 14 chairs, each one labeled, each one with a sun. Family isn't a table you're seated at. It's how people treat you when they think no one is watching. And someone was always watching. A 10-year-old girl with a bag of gifts and a memory that doesn't forget. She's 11 now. She still draws suns on everything. And the front door of this house stays open. That's our story. Mine and Nora's. If it meant something to you, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your child, or if you've ever been the kid standing at that door, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already, and check the description for another story about a mother who discovered her family had been stealing from her daughter's college fund. It's just as real. Thank you for watching, and for staying until the end.